I'm Fatheree,
This is Dave.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
So, welcome back aboard the Starship Texas, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we talk all about Star Trek all the time, and that includes animated Star Trek, which we are talking about today with our first part of two parts of the animated series talk. We are going to dive into the first 11 episodes of that 22 episode show, and we are joined by a very special guest today, Mr. Rich Schepis, the co-author of the official guide to the animated series. So, Rich, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How about you guys? Thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, thanks for taking the time to join us and talk about Star Trek the Animated Series, a show that has been often overlooked, but in recent years has definitely had a bit of a renaissance.
Father, it debuted in '73. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
September 8th, 73.
Because I just realized like people may not know too much about like the basics on it, and but yeah, obviously, kind of maybe becoming especially relevant again as Star Trek approaches with a few new animated series in the next year.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that, even though these are going to be a little bit different kind of shows, it's opening up people to the fact, oh, there was an animated show before.
Hmm?
So that's cool. People are discovering them again.
Rich, whenever we have a new person on board the podcast, we do like to ask, how was it that you got into Star Trek? And I want to ask you not only how did you get into Star Trek, but how did you get into Star Trek the Animated Series specifically?
Well, my my tale starts at the beginning, but not Star Trek's beginning. I was born in 1970, so my mom and my uncles ate up, Saturday afternoon B television movies. So I don't know if she actually watched Star Trek when it aired, but I know that she watched it in syndication, and I remember watching certain episodes with her when I was like 2 or 3 or 4. It's like my earliest memories. Um, I had the Migo Scotty figure. You know,
Yeah.
he stands out in my head because of that red shirt. And that's how it started. And then as I got older, high school age, would watch it, when it was on in the UHF channels in the Philly area. I actually just tweeted the other day, because July 4th, whenever there was July 4th, Memorial Day, and Labor Day, they always had one of the channels had a Star Trek marathon. And this is before everything else. It was all original series. So I'd watch the same episodes, but I loved it. Pop my VCR tape in so I could record them and keep watching them. I did watch the animated series when it was on Saturday mornings, but I was so young, I just knew it was Star Trek, and some of the things will stick in my head, like the music, which I love. So, and it's funny because people complaining about the repetition of it. My partner even says it makes me go crazy, but I like it because it's something that sticks out. It's like the original series music, that the fight, the mock time, dan dan dan. It's something you'll always recognize right away with it.
Yeah,
And it
totally.
isn't
It's
it isn't wallpaper music
Yeah,
like some
yeah,
other Star Treks might lean into.
yeah,
yeah,
they got some blaring brass in that stuff to let you know that it's there.
yeah.
And a couple of the themes are really quite nice.
It's like any of that other stuff. How does it add to the episode? It works. It's Star Trek. I mean, especially for '70s, late '60s, early '70s Star Trek, it's perfect. As far as the animated series gets, I mean, you know, like besides that initial exposure to it, it's just you know, being a lifelong Star Trek fan, I guess I was reintroduced to it like everybody else when it came back on Netflix, and it I remember when the DVD set came out, and I picked that up right away because, you know, I do that. I've got too many versions of every show of Star Trek as it is, and you know, I started watching it again, but you know, and I enjoyed it. You know, it's Star Trek, but you know, the problem with getting that set and Netflix is you binge it. You know, it's like, oh, they're 25 minutes long. I can watch 2 hours worth. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I've really dropped off the serialization of storytelling because everything just sort of bleeds into each other. I miss that episodic TV. I mean, even Deep Space Nine, as serialized as it was, you know what episode what each one was. I can do that a little bit with Picard, but not a lot. And so that's sort of a detriment I felt to my enjoyment of the animated series, and it's actually one of the reasons why I don't binge anything anymore. When we went back to do the book, you know, I had to rewatch the show, but I rewatched them one at a time, and you know, looking at it through a different lens now, because now I have to do it. It has to be a little analytical, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, this is season 4. This is season 4, and in fact, some of these episodes are better than season 3.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I think you know, it gets a little bit of the it's the 70s kind of cartoon animation style, so that automatically gives it a drawback. It's easy to make fun of. It's funny too, because you think about it. As Star Trek fans, we've taken all the abuse as being Star Trek fans, but even within our own fandom, there's a large population of us that mock the animated series because, oh, that's a cartoon, and it's just funny because like it doesn't end.
It's the redheaded stepchild of our fandom.
It really is. I mean, it's been nice because, you know, as the series continue to populate, you know, and the writers and they start adopting things from the shows, so that's been nice, and you start seeing references, and you know, I know Kurtzman's a big animated series fan, so it's been pretty cool to see him. They're littering the shows with these references, which, you know, like I'm sure like you guys are the same way. Like, oh, okay, I don't remember that. Let me go back and watch. And to me, like that's always the cool thing, like those Easter egg moments, you know. So it's been nice. It's been a nice renaissance, and I'm just hoping more and more people can discover it and find the charm in it, and not worry about it looking like animation today.
Yeah, and I think that the people that are kind of dismissive of it, you're missing out on so much. If you have any fondness for the original series, you really need to take the animated series seriously and just, you know, approach it like, yeah, it's going to be 70s Filmation cartoon style, but the stories are definitely written in that same kind of TOS. You know, we're not lost in space. We're not like kiddie sci-fi. We're serious Star Trek. Yeah, we might have some weird, colorful moments here or there, but we're going to take that Roddenberry approach to science fiction. You know, a lot of the animated series stories are written by TOS writers, or they're stories that were originally conceived for the original series. You have,
and notably, they have like the vast majority of the voice cast back,
yes,
the original actors.
Yes,
so if you just want to like spend some time again with Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, then the animated series is, until you get to the movies, is the only way to do it.
And they get the relationships. I mean, they've got the Kirk, McCoy, Spock relationships down. Mm-hmm. You're right. It's like going out with an old friend. We you know, it was canceled early. At season 3, at the end, people were like, "Oh, it can't end soon enough." But the animated series sort of redeems it, in my opinion, that the way they closed the original series arc. It had been interesting if they had gotten more, but generally that's how animation worked back then. I mean, you got like one big order for shows, and then they split it up into seasons, and then the second season only like 6 episodes, I think, or something like that, and they just littered it. They just pop in new episodes every so often, because kids age, you know, and the same group of kids that were watching Saturday morning cartoon this year, it's gonna be a little bit different next year, So I get that.
Yeah, Saturday morning cartoons were their own major phenomenon, I guess, in the what 70s, 80s, 90s, and starting to die out in the 2000s as a phenomenon, as kind of cable took that over, I guess.
Cable.
Fatheree, did you watch Saturday morning cartoons?
I did, yeah.
Oh,
In the
yeah.
in the 80s and 90s, I wasn't alive in the 70s, but yeah, in the 80s and 90s, I definitely. And that's actually where I first saw the animated series. Was Nickelodeon at one point had a block of TV where they were rerunning a bunch of like old 60s and 70s cartoons.
Same actually.
I saw it there.
That's awesome. Yeah, man, I remember getting up. My brother and I, we didn't need an alarm clock, obviously. We got up, went into the kitchen, got a bowl of Trix or something, loaded it up, and went right in front of the television as early as we could. It would start, and Super Friends was the big one for us.
Yeah. It was like Saturday morning cartoons were like a ritual that was just for kids, kind of. Back in the day.
Yeah. I would love to have been an older Star Trek fan back then, or the people that were discovering it, or bringing it back to life, because obviously they're getting up to watch it early, and it's a different phenomenon for them because they're looking at it through a different lens. I remember part of the interview with the book talking to Fred Bronson, and he knew that the standards and practices guy with NBC, so he'd sneak in when the episode was ready to preview so he could watch the episode, so he didn't have to be up that next morning to watch it. It was, it's pretty funny. So as an adult, these guys were all in. So you think it's for kids, but it's really not.
I know that when the series won an Emmy for its season 2 episode, Out Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, the Filmation producer Lou Scheimer said that it's so cool that we won an Emmy, but the reason why the show gets so much attention, and it's not because this is something that all the kids love. It's something that you also have all these people in their 20s and 30s who want more Star Trek who are watching it.
Yeah. I mean, I think luckily because Gene owned the rights, they had to approve it through Gene. Gene didn't allow it to become a kid's cartoon, which is where Filmation saw it going in the beginning. So I think that was key. And I think that when Gene brought Dorothy on board, Dorothy and Gene wanted to make Star Trek not a kid's cartoon. And
I don't know if we'd mentioned it, but that Dorothy Fontana is who we're talking about, and is probably pretty key to the success.
Yeah, I mean, she shepherded it through that first year. I mean, she's the one who got the writers, made sure the scripts were Star Trek, everything got forwarded to Gene. But it sounds to me like, Gene was off somewhere else and things would get passed to him. And sometimes he'd get more interested in things, and sometimes he wouldn't. I know after season 1, she had other projects that she moved on to. Bill Russell?
Bill Reed?
I think it's Bill Reed. He directed the season 2 episodes, which is, he only directed 6 of them. But at that point, the scripts were already done and everything was in process. Her and David, and then, her and Gene, and then David Gerrold talks. I got to talk to him about the book, and we were writing Star Trek, and they knew how important it was to write Star Trek for the fans. We're writing what the fans expect Star Trek to be, and I love that because it's not like, all right, they're writing entertaining television, right? But they're also remembering why they're there, and I think that's important because you could write any kind of story, set it anywhere, and if you're gonna set it in a Star Trek story, why? And I think the animated series accomplished that with medals and stars and everything else. And gold press latinum.
There you go. Well, let's go ahead and start talking about this show with the first episode, Beyond the Farthest Star, written by Samuel Pebbles. I do have the synopsis here from Memory Alpha, the little one-line synopsis. Kirk's crew comes across an ancient derelict vessel, but something is still living inside it. This is kind of like a haunted ship story. As far as this one being the first one to kick off the show, though, it does kind of establish the animated series. You see Eric's, so you're like, oh, there's this weird 3-armed guy. They have force field belts instead of environmental suits. Mr. Kyle has a mustache now.
Is Marest in there yet?
Marest didn't show up yet. I think it was a couple episodes later. The funny thing is, Eric's just seen. He doesn't really have anything to do. The thing that I remember from the episode, watching it again and again, is it's got that theme of loneliness that they've always tackled in Star Trek.
Yeah.
That alien ship was amazing. That Bob Klein drew. I mean, that was something they couldn't accomplish in late 60s on television, and that animation allowed them to do that, which was just, that is so cool,
Yeah, it's as I recall, it's like an organic ship, and it's massive. Like I don't remember how big it's supposed to be, but it's pretty insane compared to the Enterprise.
Yeah,
and it's an example of the art direction. What's that?
I said, yeah, it dwarfs the Enterprise. There's this one panel where when you see it on screen, it like takes up the whole screen, and the Enterprise is like this little ship.
Well, it's the writer of the guy who wrote Where No Man Has Gone Before, right? Quick remind me, as someone with poor memory, Where No Man Has Gone Before is the episode.
Gary Mitchell.
Right.
Yeah,
I was trying to remember because I was Charlie X, of course, features Charlie X, but I was thinking that loneliness theme that will pervade this definitely reminded me of Charlie X as an episode.
First thing I thought of too. It's one of the analogies, one of the connections I made when I was writing the book, writing about this episode.
Okay. Yeah.
Trelane is another one of those characters, if you think about it. So, and then this show is populated, and again, it get you into the human condition. I mean, it's funny because you're like, all right, well, Charlie X is crazy, just randomly making people disappear, killing them. But all right, but why? You find out, why he's doing it. Trelane just wants to have a good time with you. He's not trying to harm you, but for him, he doesn't see that those things happen in the mortal flesh because he's not mortal. He doesn't understand. He's a child. And it's interesting because this episode, the alien entity that was in the ship and then ends up getting stranded. I mean, those last couple words, they're harsh, man. So lonely when they strand them on the planet.
Right.
Yeah, but it's like, please.
Yes. It's horrible.
During the course of the episode, the fact that it's sort of a disembodied presence, what is it supposed to be? Kind of like a sentient magnetic organism or something?
Yeah, it's what did they call it? Malevolent life form. Yeah, malevolent life form. Yeah, it was incorporeal. I mean, obviously it went through the Enterprise computers, took over the Enterprise. What's his name in Star Trek V? The goddess Shakaree. Ooh, you have a starship. I need the starship to take my message everywhere. And the life form's the same way. Hey, let's go. Second star to the right.
I remember as I was watching the episode, I found that the fact that you don't see a physical entity or you don't really hear the voice, I think, until near the end, made it for like a not super dramatic opening antagonist, but there's no forgetting kind of the way it resolves. That those last few moments with it are very memorable.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I didn't think of it like that, but you're right. I mean, think about that impact. I mean, that's the great thing about these guys, these people that were writing the episodes. And Gene and Dorothy overlooking this. Like, this was good television. You know what I mean? Like, this was Star Trek. And I always find it funny that you need to have drama among the crew. It has to be dramatic. It has to be dark. And I'm like, no, look at this. You had something that didn't even appear on screen. It was a little flashing thing. And we're still talking about it 48 years later, and we're talking about the fact that, the dialogue was so scarce that at the end it had so much more of an impact.
Well, I love that moment in the ending where, the episode opened with a log entry, like all the episodes, where Captain Kirk is like, oh, we're just like out here star charting, we're beyond the furthest star. And then like after it ends, he makes another log entry and he's like, okay, well, we're resuming our star charting. Like, he's just like so used to like this insane, crazy stuff happening. And it's like, oh, just back to business as usual at the end.
As far as like this being like the, I don't know, first episode, I don't know if they had any notion of doing a mission statement, but I noticed that like they kind of handled the scientific jargon in it, although it's kind of a little techno-babbly, but they handled it pretty seriously, in the style of the original series. And it kind of had that vibe of like, yeah, we're going to kind of be doing more serious science fiction stories and not just like a kind of kiddie story or anything.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, again, it goes back to Gene and Dorothy and the writers. They were writing Star Trek. They weren't talking down to their audience. And as we examine some of the other episodes, we'll talk about some of those issues that, came up and concerns that the network had. It's interesting, but they're not hiding. I mean, think about it. From a kid's cartoon standpoint, stranding a life form, whether you saw it or not, on a planet that's begging for help, that's a tough one, man. You know what I mean? Like, that. If I was
it's a little heavier than Scooby-Doo.
Exactly. And in yesteryear, talking to Billy Simpson, William Simpson, who did the young Spock, I mean, we were even talking about that and how heavy that episode was for him. As a kid, voiced some of those words, and it's like, yeah, they made Star Trek. I mean, give him credit. And I think, that's the thing. Like, for fans that have never seen this show or are so quick to dismiss it, I think if they actually went back and gave it an opportunity, don't binge it. Please don't binge it. It's not made to be binged. Take, half an hour of your day, watch it. I have a friend, and this was one of the best things I heard. I have a best friend from high school. He bought my book, very, very flattered. His daughter grabbed it from him, and she watches the episodes, and then she reads about him. And I was like, that's what I was hoping. The way we wrote it was like, because that's cool. Because like for me, that would have been exciting for me. Like I would have done the same thing. Like with the companion books they put out, Larry's Next Generation and Paul Ruddis Voyager. It's like I'm gonna watch the episode and I'm gonna read about it. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, that's perfect. And
right. You've had this really cool little experience in your day, but you're not trying to work on quantity.
Well, yeah, and it's like, my wife, she'll sit there and she'll watch like Sons of Anarchy, and she'll binge it through the whole weekend. I watched all the shows, and she's enjoying it for what she wants out of it. But for me, like, no, I want that episode to stick. I want to think about it. I love the fact that these episodes, like CBS All Access, it's one at a time, one a week. It forces you to slow it down. I know some people wait. It's like, it's almost like we want to rush through everything. We do. And it's a shame, because some of these stories should really be enjoyed, savored, like a fine glass of wine.
Yeah.
We've mentioned yesteryear. Do we want to jump to that, Fatheree?
Sure. Yeah. Let's just go ahead and go into episode 2, yesteryear. Spock travels back in time to prevent his own demise during his youth on Vulcan, and this is the only episode that is written by Dorothy Fontana, although she was, giving notes and helping revise all the other ones. This is the only one that she actually wrote herself, very much in line with her Spock-focused episodes of the original series, which I would like to mention that Dorothy was always the one trying to put a little bit more continuity in the original series, and you get a lot of that in the animated series. Almost every episode refers to something from the original series.
I think as Star Trek fans that were checking it out, not just the kids, they appreciated that. You know what I mean? It's like, that means, my time is being rewarded. That was one of the biggest things that I enjoyed about the Kelvin timeline movies. For that universe, and I know that universe isn't perfect from a Star Trek standpoint, but for that universe to exist, those 800 hours of television that we've all invested our lives in had to have happened. And I love that. I mean, I just think, like, okay, so you're telling the fans that this all had something to play with it. And it's like you said, with the animated shows, she's taking yesteryear and, all right, this is Spock's continuation. We've heard about some of this story, and we learned from his mother about the Pet Lot, and now you get to see the Pet Lot. And I think, again, 1960s television, late 60s, early 70s television, it's, it's the Gorn, which the Gorn's awesome, but, how do you pull off the Lot?
Yeah, this was not only like kind of a sequel to Journey to Babel, where we have more like the Sarek and Amanda stuff, but also they bring back the Guardian of Forever from City on the Edge of Forever. So
yeah, they're just like running some like Like not they're doing like some historical studies basically, right?
Yeah,
Right.
which I
So
mean, it's cool too. As a kid, like, were they doing historical studies? Like, you don't hear historical studies when you're when you're watching Fat Albert or Scooby Doo. So that's a pretty cool thing. You know what I mean? And then the next day, Monday, you're in social studies class, and they're talking about historical studies, and you're like, they do that on Star Trek.
Yeah. Except they get to go through a cool portal and like actually experience it and stuff. Although in the tradition, something there, dramatic has to happen, and in this case, what happens? Spock is often like in visiting one era when things go down that involve him in another, and he's not there, and it like bends the timeline.
I love that. I thought that was such a cool concept. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, he wasn't there to do what he had to do at that moment. And so that was always him. It's like the Deep Space Nine episode with the Bell rides with Gabriel Bell. Cisco is Gabriel Bell. As funny as that is, it's like, I love that kind of stuff, and that's deep.
You know what I thought was cool in this is that Kirk and Spock, very early on in the episode, there is kind of like they figure out what happened. That Spock, as a young kid, his vague memory of being helped through this Vulcan ritual of manhood. Like when you're in your early, or like when you're about to hit your teens, I guess, or maybe a little younger, that he was helped by like an older cousin, and they very rapidly figure out, oh, you were helping yourself. And I thought that was cool that they snapped to it so fast that it's not like a big mystery. That's not the end mystery,
No, they figure out the timey-wimey stuff really fast. But that's kind of the writing structure of the animated series, where things were kind of concise and fast-paced. There's no fluff, there's no filler.
That's
what do they have? 25 minutes, 22 minutes,
like 23 or 24.
And it's one of the things we got to talk to David Gerald about, with just the structure and the difficulty he had first learning how to write for a different television structure, where the acts and where you put your cliffhangers. And I think that's interesting because it also, like you said, allows for concise storytelling. I feel like these Star Trek episodes, because they are limited in the time they have to tell their stories, are some of the most purest Star Trek stories. You don't get as much character as the original series episodes would allow. But as yesteryear shows you, there is character. They can build that out. So, I think that was the 22 minutes, 26 minutes, whatever it was. I think it helped it, honestly.
I mean, there's a lot of original series episodes that weren't great that probably could have benefited from being cut down to a 26-minute story.
Yeah, I especially the second half of the series. That, for me, that first half still holds up. I mean, watching all the way up to Apple, it's amazing 50 plus years later how. And it's funny because and I know that a lot of people got introduced to Star Trek because of the spaceship and lasers and stuff like that. But for me, it's like you could have the worst special effects, even like early Doctor Who. But if the stories are engaging and the characters are engaging, I'm all in. And the animated series is like that for them. I mean, they're engaging. These are great stories, well written. The voice actors are the actors that played the roles, and they are engaged. They have the back and forth. The Bones and Spock stuff is classic. It's everything you want out of Star Trek. And yesteryear.
So in this, speaking of the voice actors, we had Mark Leonard back as Sarek, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's one of just 3 guest actors that returned. And they really only had a couple more guest actors. Everybody else is pretty much voiced by the crew, with Jimmy Doohan voicing almost everybody. He voiced Koloth and Kor, and yeah, it's pretty funny. Who knew that he was a master of all voices?
But this one gets pretty heavy pretty quick because it explores that quality. You were talking about the Star Trek Kelvin movies, and those showed Spock's bullying, and that's kind of highlighted in this. His difficulties as a kid and his kind of angst, as well as like there's some great bits of Vulcan lore that are woven in. But that's front and center as Spock, with only a hazy memory, adult Spock, of like what exactly happened during this trial. Goes back to try and keep himself from getting killed in it, and it's pretty difficult. Like what is it? Sarek apologizes to adult Spock, who he doesn't know is Spock, for his son's emotional outburst when really his son was being bullied. And it's one of those cases where Sarek comes across as rather cold. We know he isn't always that way, but it's kind of tough watching here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, and we're watching it through the lens of being a human being. I always like to look at it like that, because a lot of times, we experience different cultures on this planet, and we watch how certain things unfold, and we're like, as Americans, and what are they doing? Why are they doing that? And so you look at Sarek treating young Spock like that, and you're like, that's not cool. Like, you're a Vulcan. You're supposed to be evolved. Why are you treating your son? Why are you apologizing for your son's emotional outburst? And the great thing about him having that outburst, he's part human. And it reminds you that, just because he's more logical as we get to the original series and stuff like that, he's always had that humanity, that part of him, that emotional edge to him. And I love that about the character. I think it was one of the reasons why people were able to embrace him so much, because they could connect to him in that way.
And it was a good enough scene that they basically lifted exactly for the movie in 2009.
It's true.
Yes, they did, didn't they? Which I think helped. The movie, and probably helped.
Absolutely.
Think about how many people watched that movie that never watched Star Trek, that went in because of JJ, because of Chris Pine, and then saw that scene, and now they've got a connection to that Spock.
Yeah, instantly they kind of understand the difficulties of sort of a multiracial heritage for him.
The big note for this episode too was his Sailot, Aichaya, dying.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man,
the network had some issues with that, and so it was a powerful thing, because you're talking about euthanasia. You're talking about euthanasia with kids, and we mentioned in the book, Dorothy had mentioned it in the interview, the NBC got all these calls thanking him for approaching that, because that's something that kids have to learn to deal with. It's like, so I'm sure you guys experienced this too. We always had pets growing up, and then when I was younger, you wake up one morning, hey, where's Misty? Where's Kojak? And my mom would say, we brought them to the farm to let them, live out their life. And you're like, oh, okay. You're a kid. You're thinking, all right, I live in Philadelphia in a small row home. So it's like, they don't have a lot of room. Okay, that makes sense, right? And you just don't think about it again. And I was watching some episodes of Friends, and there's a scene where Ross talks about it. And they say, Ross, they didn't take him to a farm. And I turn and I said to my wife, but my parents actually did that. They actually brought them to a farm, and she waited for it to click. And I'm like,
oh man.
It's like decades later, I feel betrayed. So I feel like, if you're a kid that can sort of wrap your head around the decision that Spock has to make there, I think it's powerful stuff, man. Think about it. Your first episode, you're talking about doing something that goes against everything that Star Trek's about learning about new life forms and trying to understand different cultures, because this life form is malevolent and knows nothing about how to behave except this way, so they have to strand him. Now this episode, he has to agree to kill his pet, not put his pet to death, allow him to die a peaceful death. That's big stuff, man. I mean, first 2 episodes of the animated series. Is there anything similar to that in the original series that I'm missing? This decision?
Not that I can think of. Like, yeah, a sort of merciful death with honor sort of moment or anything. Doesn't quite ring a bell, Fatheree.
No, but it was kind of like, not really preachy, but it was kind of like having kind of like what would be, I guess, a significant message to a kid audience that this is like the humane thing to do. And it was weird for me because I just rewatched this recently. I had a dog that I had to have put to sleep back in March, and I actually was rewatching the animated series a little bit, and I watched this episode later that night, and I was like, this is gonna be weird because I'm gonna really connect with Spock here, and I'm feeling the same emotions that he's going through, and it kind of explains why when adult Spock says to him the dialogue, logic offers a serenity human seldom experience. And it's kind of like why he says, "Oh, I'm gonna choose the Vulcan way and embrace logic." And it's like, yeah, because like this is so painful. Like you don't want to go through this pain. And that dialogue, that line of dialogue again, was good enough that get used in Star Trek '09. So
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for it. I always like the fact that the popularity of Spock's character, which you see here in the way he's talking to his younger self, and he says those things, it's always about balance. It's like, and they show you the dangers with Sarek's behavior. Here's the dangers of being absolute. It's like, as humans, we need to balance ourselves. We can't be all emotion. We can't be all id. But I also don't think we could be all by the book, by robot. There's always going to be that gray area that you're going to need to balance. And that was a great teaching moment because you had to learn those things. And the other thing is they let Spock make his choice, which I loved. Even though Sarek was very much about the Vulcan way, and they did it in the movie too.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose. How many kids at that point in their lives were allowed to choose something like that? It gave them an idea. I have a choice. I can choose how I want to grow up, what kind of person I want to be. Not I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a teacher. Not a career, but a person. And it's powerful stuff, man. Did you ever think we'd sit down and talk about the animated series this way? These episodes that universally, can be mocked, but we're tearing them apart. It's Star Trek. It's season 4 of Star Trek.
Well, yeah, I had tears on my face when I was watching it, so I know that there was something going on.
I talked to Billy about it, and I was like, dude, you were powerful in that role. I said, he goes, I'm going to tell you this right now. I forget if it was Lou or Norm. They were giving him the voice direction. He's like, they just told me to read it. That's all I did. I read it. But for whatever reason, he was perfect for the role because the way he delivered the lines, it was like it had that weight to it. And I'm talking to him, he's like, yeah, there's no weight to it. I thought that was the funniest thing. But, again, the lens that I'm watching it through, how we're watching it, you're watching it after you had to put a pet down, which I'm so sorry. That sucks so much. That's a hard thing to do, and then to be able to watch that episode and maybe give you a little better understanding or a little more peace. That's sort of cool. I mean, it's like, how often do we get to connect to something for real like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Fatheree, do we want to move on to One of Our Planets is Missing?
Sure, yeah. We'll go ahead and talk about episode 3, One of Our Planets is Missing, by Mark Daniels. The Enterprise crew learns that a massive planet-destroying cloud has entered Federation space. This is kind of a trope that happens a lot in the animated series where they set up a story idea that will later be reused in Star Trek, like it's like this giant cloud is coming to attack this Federation world, and we have to go deal with this mysterious alien intelligence that Spock will mind meld with, much like the motion picture.
It seems like Gene had, he was like, if this works, and he had a goal to have another story, like, all right, I'm going to adopt certain parts of it. I don't know if that's true, but it's like he said, you can see so many similarities. It's frightening.
But TV of back in the day when things were primarily episodic, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that someone had seen every episode of every season, reusing an idea kind of makes more sense because you're like, well, many people might not have seen this episode, so yeah, let's do an expanded version for the motion picture or whatever. It was just the style of the time. Comic books didn't get collected in graphic novels. There were yet to be DVDs and Blu-rays, and VHS was just poking its head out. So it does kind of make sense to reuse some tropes if you felt they worked.
Yeah, I mean, it did. It 100% worked, which was awesome.
Oh, and I read that this is written by the guy who directed the Doomsday Machine in the original series. Yeah. So it has elements of that kind of, we need to deal with this before it starts wrecking planets element. Is just a recurring motif.
High stakes.
Which is, there's your drama. You don't need Spock and McCoy like absolutely trying to kill each other on the bridge every week. You can have that play between the interplay between them. But I mean, here's your drama. Loved it. I thought it was a great. It's a really strong episode. I loved the little, and I in the book we did a section called Something for the Kids, and I tried to pull something out of each episode that might have been like a lesson, even though it wasn't probably deliberate, because it's still Saturday morning TV, and it was like a biology lesson, and I thought that was really cool. They were, trying to make it the metaphor to give the kids an idea. Okay, well, this is an alien cloud, but it's like a stomach. I just thought that was like, oh, that's really neat. You know what I mean?
There were some cool background paintings in there too that had some really beautiful, I thought, borderline abstract, but also reminiscent of sort of like internal organs without getting gross. Like had like that sort of Saturday morning veneer, but it still there were some pretty beautiful paintings, I thought.
What stood out to me in this one is that what a lot of the original series and the animated series do that I kind of wish they would have done a better job with on like the Next Generation is that they often try to maintain a sense of dramatic urgency where like a lot of times there's some type of ticking clock where it's like oh no, like we really have to figure this out soon or all these people on this planet are gonna die, and stuff like that where the Next Generation kind of took like a more
leisurely.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a nice way of putting it.
It's my friendly way to say it.
I mean, I love TNG, but just like this TOS flavor is a little bit more to my sensibilities.
TNG always felt like it's part of the journey. TOS always felt like we got to fix this, and I think that's like that was the big difference. And even
more
in
proactive.
the exactly, and they had to be, first of all for the TV at the time, but they were it was when TNG came on the air, it's 100 years later, 150 years later, so it's the universe is different, so it's like hopefully 100 years from now our world will be like that. Maybe it'll be like that,
right? That one of my favorite lines in this is, and actually in all the episodes I've seen so far, is the sort of the gravity that the guy who's like the planetary governor, when he's like, we have
the ultimate computer, right? That was the Commodore. There's the ultimate computer.
Yeah, that's who he is. Yeah. There's another call
using the continuity.
Awesome. Yeah. So
that's cool. I didn't realize that.
As a fan to watch the show, that's like bonus, right? It's like he's in a logical next role.
That is very cool. But yeah, he's like, Kirk is like, how are you going to decide? You've only got time to rescue like 6,000 people, and the guy says there's no choice at all. We'll save the children. And I was like, oh wow, that's just the way he delivered it. It had some real gravity to it.
I mean, it's like a oh shit moment.
Yeah,
it's like, this is serious.
And it tells you how powerful voice actors can be and how important they are. We're also glancing over one of the more important parts of the episode too. I mean, here you go again. Where in the first episode they failed the alien life form. In this episode, they realized, okay, we can reach out to this life form. It only knows its function. Can we help it? And I just thought that was great because Kirk, if we're going to have to blow up the ship to blow this thing up, we're going to do it, which, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And Spock's like, but I think we can reach this. Doesn't it have a right to exist if it can exist without killing everybody else?
That's actually been one of my favorite things about the episodes, which most of these I have not seen before, or at least have only the blurriest of childhood memories over, is that there many times they come to some sort of accord by the end of the episode with the threat, whatever it is. And so, yeah, there's an interesting question of like, do they have to kill this very singular, unique being to save this planet? Or, as you say, can Spock find another way? And I love when Trek does that.
Spock sitting in the chair, doing the bulk, like, yeah. I mean, and I think it's powerful that a couple episodes later, after they just stranded one for eternity again, that now they're trying to like, and obviously they don't refer to it, but as a viewer, you're like, okay, we're learning. All right, this one we felt like there was no redemption for, but the next one, all right, well maybe there is some redemption. I sort of like that, because we're always learning, and if anything, Star Trek's always been about the human condition, learning about ourselves more than anything. I never saw it as science fiction. I'll be honest with you. I just saw that science fiction was the vessel they used to tell these stories.
Well, shall we move on to episode 4, the Lorelei signal?
Yeah.
Love the Lorelei signal.
Written by Margaret Arman,
Yep.
the Enterprise is drawn to a planet populated solely by women who dominate the male crew members' minds to the point that Uhura must assume command to rescue them. And that's the big claim to fame for this episode, is you get to see Uhura take charge and kick ass and take names.
Yeah, and Michelle's, that's, one of two of Michelle's favorite stories, with the Dr. King story. And then this story about how finally she looked at Margaret Orman when she was reading the script, finally, which was cool. The other interesting thing is that, NBC didn't have any issues with the female members of the crew being assertive and taking control to save the crew. And you saw that in other original series episodes. One that always comes to my mind is Dagger of the Mind, Helen Noel. The only notes they made was, the sexist notes. How do they look? What are they wearing? But you can still tell your story and show the characters, the gender progressing despite what they're wearing, within the time, and it always reminded me, like I said, Dagger of the Mind, when Helen Noel, you first meet her, she's this accomplished scientist that's going down on the planet. Now, is she eye candy? Sure. I mean, she's a damsel in distress, and she behaves that way for a little bit. She's a love interest. But if it's not for her, they don't escape the planet. And I just, so it's the same thing here. If it's not for Uhura being strong as a Starfleet officer to take command away from Scotty, the men are dead.
Yep. I noticed there was some scene in this where Uhura is talking to one of the women who she is also doing the voice acting for, I think, in this one.
Yeah.
Which is not the last time I think that will occur, but it's just one of those kind of slightly funny moments of minor limitations of the show. Is the
her
shared voice
basically based on the female actor. So
yeah.
Hey, think about this. Originally, Michelle wasn't going to be on the show. That means Majel would have voiced everyone.
Right.
But I love that moment when Uhura beams down and she's talking to the women on the planet, and she's like, where's our captain? Where's Spock? And they're kind of like not cooperating with her, and so she's like, okay, I'm just gonna stun all of you and figure it out myself. And I'm always like, why don't people do that more often in Star Trek? You can just like stun the bad guy and then go about your business.
I guess, no nonsense, life or death. At a certain point, you got that timer. You got to find them. They're going to drown. And yeah, I mean, it's leadership, isn't it? Sometimes you got to make that quick decision. And again, that's what I love about her. She showed you that she had that ability to make that quick decision. Honestly, she had more to do in the animated series as a character than she did in the original series. And, and as much as, I love Walter Koenig, not Walter Koenig, well, I do love Walter, but George Takei, she had more to do than Sulu's character, if you think about it. It's interesting because, all these episodes.
Now, I have to mention that even though this episode also has the most take charge moment, there's a sort of aggressiveness maybe to the women draining men to survive motif.
Well, and they're talking about the women's appearance. They're all so beautiful. Scotty.
It's almost a very Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon kind of trope that they're weaving some sci-fi elements into, because Planets of Beautiful Women is an old 50s trope, or so.
Well, it goes back to the Greek mythology.
Yeah,
the sirens.
No, 100%.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, that's what they are, the Lorelei signal. I mean, that's what that is. I'm sure that helped with the NBC studio people too, saying, "All right, we're getting what we want to get." So tell your story. You can tell your story because this is one of the elements we need to have in this show, which is weird for a kid show. That you felt the need to have elements where the characters are wearing, the female characters are wearing these skirts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess kids have to start discovering things at some point.
But yeah, it's unfortunate that the plight of the women on this planet, their struggle is that oh no, we have to drain the energy out of men, but what we really want to do is just find men that we can love and have families with, and poor us for not being able to do that, because that's obviously what all women care about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely. I don't think like if you did this in an episode of Discovery today or Picard, different reaction, right? And
Mm.
I always, I'm always amused. I always find it interesting when people discover these episodes for the first time now, or even people that have been longtime fans and rewatch it, and they'll place today's societal values
Sure.
on a story that was told, 50 years ago. And I mean, I get where you're coming from, but no one was there 50 years ago. I love the fact that you could see where we've come from. Going with the wind. I used to teach. I used to be a high school English teacher. I used to teach Of Mice and Men. Dropping N bombs everywhere. Everybody. There was a class system, and it's important. It's important to learn. You don't want to cancel. You don't also take away from the positives of what they're showing. Okay, so they're demonstrating women in this way. Are they doing things that are, I don't want to say not acceptable today, but are they doing things that are going to put their lives at risk outside of being a crew member because they're women? No. Are they overprotective sometimes? Yeah. Are the women shown a little bit more in a romantic way? Sure. But if you think about it, what's the Beetle test? Look at this episode. I mean, Uhura, Barrett, even the women, and I know the women, but especially Uhura and Barrett, their conversations, while it's about saving the men, they're taking the leadership. They're working together because of that.
Yeah,
You know what I
totally.
mean? It's like, yeah, I just found the episode like it's so powerful in that way. And again, as a kid watching it in the morning, it just shows you the potential the episode has. I appreciate this opportunity because I miss teaching English and getting to talk about the books. So getting to break down episodes
No.
is a lot of fun for me because I don't always get to do that anymore.
Cool. Well, yeah, this is fun for us as well. And just one last thing on Lorelei Signal. I think we need to move on, but it is so refreshing to see that security team of they're not red shirts, they're red skirts, and they're actually like good. They're efficient. They kick ass.
I never thought of it that way. I wish I could have used that in the book. That would have been fun.
Well, just gonna transition to the Tribbles episode, the More Tribbles, More Trouble by David Gerald.
Yep.
While escorting a shipment of grain to Sherman's planet, the Enterprise encounters three old friends, Koloth, Cyrano Jones, and Tribbles.
It's a great episode. It's a great follow-up, It was an episode that Gene and David Gerald actually, not Gene, was it Gene Solo before he left the show? One of the executive producers on season 2. They discussed making this episode, making an episode like this. And when Fred Friedenberg took over season 3, he said Star Trek's not supposed to be funny. So it's which is funny because some of those episodes are hilarious in its own way.
Oh yeah.
So for him to come back, I mean that whole Glommer, that whole Tribble eating alien is awesome because that was something that he had in his mind to tell in the original series season 3. And again, they got Stanley Adams come back to play Cyrano Jones, which is huge because I don't think you can do that character without that voice.
Right.
That was cool to see the Tribbles back in action, but it was weird that they were all pink, and this is where that whole the pink thing and Hal Sutherland, the director, being colorblind. But I learned from your book that the story is actually often incorrect. The idea that there's a lot of stuff that was accidentally pink because the director was colorblind, but you and Aaron wrote that you talked to the storyboard artist who told you no, the colorist actually wanted those things to be pink. He just really liked pink.
Irv Kaff and really like pink. It's interesting. I mean, because Dorothy, it's very possible that that what's his name was colorblind. Probably was. So he probably didn't recognize the issue at first. But it was, Bob Klein's working with Irv Kaplan daily, who's doing the colors, so he knows what he's doing. It reminds you, did you guys see What We Left Behind, the Deep Space Nine documentary?
I have.
So Andrew Robinson starts the whole documentary talking about, what our memories remember. And when I talked to Bob, I'm like, oh, that answers that question. But then when I talked to Dorothy, and she goes back to that old, urban legend. So the truth's probably somewhere in between the middle. It's just funny because it's what they both, who's right and who's wrong doesn't matter. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. So it's like that whole, this is how we remember it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I liked one of the things I dug about this episode is that it's kind of opens with like a grabber where you get an old school Klingon D7 showdown with to get it going. What do they rescue Cyrano who's being chased by it, and Kirk is like, Klingons are gonna beam over to get him, and he's like, the first Klingon that steps in here is gonna be the last Klingon.
Yeah,
it's I guess Cold War Kirk.
Which was typical for the time it was told too, right? I mean, we're in the middle of Cold War then.
But like the original Trouble with Tribbles, it's kind of having some fun with those age-old enemies, the same way that Bond movies might sometimes have some fun with his Russian, counter agents.
It has one of my favorite pieces of dialogue in all of Star Trek. Scotty says, "We got Tribbles on the ship, Quinto Trincicale in the quarters, Klingons in the quadrant. It could ruin your whole day." I just like, and he just rolled up his tongue, and I'm like, this is awesome. This is Tribbles, man. You know what I mean? It's like so cool.
That sounds like it could be a Simon Pegg Scotty line.
Oh my god!
He would deliver that pretty well.
Oh yeah.
I thought I had seen this, but as I was watching it, I didn't really remember it. I knew the name Glommer. But the notion that it was this, what is it? It's like a genetic prototype of like a Tribble eater.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That Cyrano's made off with, and the Klingons, they want it back.
Yeah. Because they want to just the purge that the Tribbles are in their home world.
Yeah.
And they beam them over again.
What is it? Is it Cyrano? Did he genetically modify the Tribbles? So like his claim is that they no longer reproduce at the rate they do, or they don't reproduce at all.
Yeah.
But there is another effect, which is that
they grow large.
Yeah. I did not know that. I was laughing at this episode. It was really fun to see these giant fat Tribbles flopping around the Enterprise.
One of the fun things for me too was the way Aaron, because he designed the book. We were lucky that Weldon Owen allowed us to make the book we wanted to make. If you look at the pages in the section, you'll see each page there's a couple more Tribbles. So then by the end of that section of the story, Kirk is surrounded by Tribbles again. And it's like those little notes that only like Star Trek fans are going to pick up. But it was just such a fun thing, the way he's like, oh yeah, we're putting this in like that. It's like the data bank. If you look at the data bank, there's different colors. He forgets there was a reason why he used which ones for each episode. But he forgets what the rule was or the translation. But that's a cool thing too. I mean, it's just it's those little tidbits. It's just like the animated series bringing back Cyrano Jones and the Tribbles. Hey, think about the Klingon ship too. This new. You talk about they've got the parasite, the Glommer. They also have this new weapon that it's pretty big deal. I mean,
Yeah, they have a cool tactical kind of elaborate stalemate kind of battle with it, and they go into a little bit of detail.
And then it showed you how it wasn't sustainable, which I liked. It's like, okay, this is why it doesn't last. You gotta think to yourself. Think about it. In 24th century, maybe they have the ability to do it now. We never saw it again. Although the Klingons didn't seem like they would expend resources on something that failed, right? They never seemed like a culture that would go back. Hey, this might work now.
Yeah, they're looking for the next shiny bit of weaponry, I guess.
I'm just gonna beam aboard with my bat lab.
This had an exchange that cracked me up. That was just, there's a lot of funny stuff throughout the episode, but there's a wry bit with Spock where Kirk says, he's like, Mr. Spock, do you have any ideas? And Spock says we could always throw Tribbles at them. And Kirk is like, I thought Vulcans didn't have a sense of humor. And Spock just deadpans, we don't, Captain. And Kirk raises the eyebrow in the traditional Spock, like, curious.
But, at the end of the day, it was a logical response because how are you going to stop them? You throw Tribbles out. You beam the Tribbles back on the ship. It's hilarious. It is. What Uhura said in the episode, we could throw rocks at them. Now if that was delivered by Spock, that'd be different. But no, there's definitely the humor. He's the best straight man. Well, Data's the best straight man.
Oh yeah.
But Yeah, Spock is the close second.
And this also has a 47 in it, which was
Yeah.
before
Oh.
Joe Menosky started that in The Next Generation. But yeah, at one point, Kirk tells Cyrano Jones, "You are in violation of 3 Federation mandates and 47 local ones."
Yeah, the number starts popping up, right? Keeps going.
So the thing that does kind of frustrate me with this episode is that it is almost like beat for beat the same thing as The Trouble with Tribbles. But like you were saying, like take things in the context of, like the time they came out. Most people had not watched The Trouble with Tribbles multiple times in 1973, so it was kind of cool to revisit that story in like this new updated sequel.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. One of my, a lot of times in popular culture, we redo something. How many times have we seen Batman's origin on the big screen? And I remember I was complaining to one of my friends, and he reminded me, this is somebody's first Batman. And I was like, oh, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. So like you said, like, all right, we've seen this story repeated. We see the connections between V'ger and one of our planets is missing. But for somebody that saw V'ger for the first time, they had no background for that. So it's interesting, like you said, Father, that all right, beat for beat, it's pretty much similar, but it still entertains. It doesn't, and I think because of the story content, it can be you can get away with that, and it's somebody's first.
They needed that a light episode to counterbalance. I was still probably grieving the loss of Aichaya at that point.
Yeah, it was good. It was good to change up the tone a little bit after that, I guess. The next episode 6, The Survivor, was written by James Schmerer or Schmerer. The Enterprise encounters the ship of a noted Federation philanthropist missing for nearly 5 years near the Romulan neutral zone. I think the coolest thing in this one is that we get to see some Romulans, and they have someone who's not voiced by James Doohan. They actually brought on Ted Knight as a guest star.
I don't think he was compensated either. He wasn't credited, and he was a friend of either Norm or Luce, and he'd done a couple of the other Saturday morning shows for him. So I'm it's a shame we never had a chance to talk to him about it, and there's nothing published about it. It'd be interesting to know if he just had an affection for animation, for cartoons, and or it was just a friendship thing, because obviously the guy was busy. Wasn't like he was just sitting around with time on his hands to do that. I love this story too. I mean, what a great story. Again, it starts with malevolent ideas. Here you're being infiltrated, but a love is showing you that okay, love can solve it though, because of his caring for the Anne's character. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, there was I was just thinking about how maybe I don't know if it was the sort of communist paranoia, but there's like this long and kind of fun tradition of shape-changing aliens in pop culture. So there's the body snatchers, there's the Skrulls over at Marvel, and then you have this guy who's another infiltrator, and almost like the more recent Captain Marvel movie kind of showed the Skrulls to not be as monolithic as bad guys as they used to be. They, much earlier than this, back in the early 70s, had a guy, the revelation that these aliens that were kind of universally feared, I guess, and mistrusted, had some honor and love among them, and maybe the ability to change, and maybe people were even wrong about some of that stuff.
Think about how many Cold War sleeper agents lived in the States that were Russians, that when it came time to do something, they went against their programming because they came to develop a life. And not all of them obviously, but there's some that fought against it. And I mean, even him, I was going to get my life back. The Romulans were going to give me my life back, and so I'm going to do what I have to do. But because of, like you said, the caring and the love, and develops that. And I like that she loves him still, because he reminds her, and she looks past the image. Because I mean, that's a pretty scary image. So
Yeah,
it
they're these
shows
kind
you
of
that.
cool floating tentacled creatures.
Oh, yeah, it's
the
like an
the
octopus.
Vendorian.
Yeah,
And we've seen
yeah,
several times during the episode it like takes somebody out. It comes up, kind of KOs them, and
yeah,
replaces them.
yeah. The scene in sickbay when McCoy rushes them out and Spock's like, I've never seen him agreeable with me before, and Kirk's like, yeah, I think you might be right. And they go back in and there's an extra bed in there. What's that doing there?
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was a fun scene.
And I think this might be the first time we see Maress.
I think you might be right. Yeah, welcome aboard, Maress. Yeah, Survivor. So
we get
cool
we get
character.
Maress and we get the Romulans. Even though the Romulan commander, I thought he sounded like Kermit the Frog and wasn't as intimidating as I would have liked him to be. But
I'm sure it was probably difficult to change voices so much, you know?
yeah, you can only come up with so many different voices.
Yeah.
You know what I liked? There's a bit of subtlety at the end when the Vendorian he essentially fesses up. He's outed himself. He's saved the crew at that point, and he says like what's going to happen to him. And Kirk says you're still going to have to stand trial for this, and he accepts it. But then he's like, Kirk asks, or maybe she volunteers, but his one-time fiance sort of. There's obviously a connection, but they agree that they're going to talk about it. It's not quite they're instantly like in each other's arms and kissing. They're like, let's see where we can take this, and it does seem clear that there's a future for them, but they didn't just jump right wholeheartedly into it, and I kind of appreciated that subtlety.
Gave you something to think about when the episode ended.
Yeah, again, more nuanced than your typical 70s Saturday morning cartoon.
And it didn't hit you over the head. I mean, like Fat Albert, like a lot of those shows there was a lesson they were teaching you in each episode, and they almost wrapped it up at the episode. This is what we learned today. Again, the animated series was written just like the original series. The viewer gets to think about what they're seeing, and as it ends, it's not neatly wrapped up. You can think about, okay, where could this story possibly go? Hey, does the malevolent life form get off M83? Do we find out why, when the pet Say-a-Lot dies, how did that affect Spock? Was there changes? Because that changed, that changed in that timeline. It's just interesting to see, like, it's awesome. And you leave it open-ended for kids. We appreciate it as adults, but you leave it open-ended for kids, which is great again. It shows them use your imagination, and it's like, which I think is lacking today, unfortunately. That's my cranky old man.
Thank God we didn't get like Kirk turning to the audience and saying, today Spock learned something important.
Oh yeah, that would have been terrible.
The old G.I. Joes knowing is half the battle.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Spock, shall we go on to one of the stranger episodes, the Infinite Vulcan?
Yeah, absolutely. The coolest thing about this, though, is it is Walter Koenig's contribution to the animated series. Dorothy was able to get him in there, somehow, and get his name in the credits.
It's actually Gene's secretary that recommended he submit the script, which is pretty cool. She would type up scripts for him, and that's how he got on Gene's radar about writing scripts. I feel so bad for Walter. This episode was so painful for him to write. How many revisions they kept making him go back to. And the worst part is, and you'll see in other episodes down the line, they did animate some of the writers and art directors. David Gerald got animated. He was a transporter controller. The artist had a scene where they were, and Walter put a scene in where Chekhov was in it, no dialogue, so they didn't have to pay him to voice, and they still want to draw his character, which is just like, what happened? Is it possible that is there something behind the scenes that we never found out? Maybe they didn't want a Russian crew member on board. I don't know, but it's maybe the network didn't want that. Maybe they thought that was too much. Maybe it was I don't know, but it just seems like they really went out of their way to torture him. And as far as the animated series go, I get replacing the character. Why you replace the character? You wanted to. I get you can only have so many characters, but just to even acknowledge him, I think would have been nice. He was the one guy that did didn't come back. I mean, originally he was one of three, but then, Nimoy draws the line in the sand, gets Nichelle and George back.
Mr. Kyle got to show up, but poor Chekhov doesn't.
Yeah, but it's James Doohan doing the voice.
Yeah, well.
Speaking of Kyle, though, they do kind of make it up to Walter, I think, in The Wrath of Khan, when they give him like the big story with Khan and the Reliant, and Mr. Kyle there as well.
He had a lot to do in the original series. I appreciate. I mean, in the movies, I appreciated that. I think probably of all those secondary actors, he probably had the most. Right? He gets promoted to security chief on a motion picture. He's Terrell's first officer. What else do we have? 3 and 4. Well, 4, he's pivotal
Nuclear
to
vessels.
the nuclear vessels.
In 5, he's in the captain's chair when they're trying to negotiate with Sybok.
It's awesome. And then 6, he's sort of like, he's like everything. Like, all right, we need a Starfleet person. It's Chekhov, even though it's not always great, the interaction, but still, like, he's on the screen a lot in 6. So I gotta appreciate it. I just think like the films really gave him an opportunity that his character didn't really get before that. So,
but yeah, this episode is just insane. If you just read the synopsis for it, it's a species of intelligent plants led by a clone of a eugenics wars era scientist, clone Spock with the intention of creating a master race to keep the peace. That sounds like 3 different ideas combined into one 24-minute story.
And like, think about it, if you were a kid and they tried to explain that synopsis to you. What? It's probably adults at the same time, like you just said. What?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing it suffers from, and I'm sure the rewrites had something to do with, is that it feels like there's too many ideas kind of struggling for time here. Although I did really like how the plant guys looked.
It's a cool design.
And Bob Klein and those guys, they just did people don't realize sometimes the guys that drew the show, that publicized the show, they were huge fans. So that's another part of why it's so successful, is because it was made by people that loved Star Trek. So like you said, like, they put the time. I mean, Bob Klein drew over 100 designs for that alien ship in the first episode.
Huh.
And, it's like he loved it. Who's going to do that for a cartoon? And no offense, because, everything is always about this Star Trek. It's animated Star Trek. But let's be honest, it's a Saturday morning cartoon. That's how the network saw it. Network didn't see Star Trek. Filmation probably saw as a balance. So is, Bob Klein, he's like, all right, how much work am I going to put into this? So it's a testament. So yeah, those creatures are awesome. Think about it. You get the dragon, the plant dragon in this episode. I love the cloning part too. I mean, even with Spock being like, 300 feet tall, I just thought that was sort of cool,
If nothing else, you're getting to kind of play around with the visuals of animation. I felt like in this one, maybe it like like a little 60s psychedelia craziness was getting in there.
Which,
a little Yellow Submarine-ish.
Well, there's more of that in the next episode that we're going to talk about. But, so stick a pin in that, because we're definitely going to circle back to it. But the bad guy here, the guy who's from the eugenics war, so ties into Khan and Spacey, but Dr. Stavros Caniculus 5, that's some like weird like comic booky type, and he's just like this giant in a skirt, like that's weird stuff.
You can afford shirts probably back then. You probably have better materials actually, No, we're just gonna walk around bare-chested in a skirt.
And that guy is a scientist. Like, that guy like went to the college and earned a doctorate.
Yes.
And then cloned himself a few times.
And then subscribe to the eugenics point of view.
Oh yeah, so he's also like a racist. He's like believes in like the superior man. He's basically a Nazi.
Was he trying to help the plants were essentially sterile and dying, the plant aliens.
Right.
Was he trying to help them though?
I think he was.
He was going to create.
But he was also I don't want to say brainwashed, but it became his followers, his cult. So in helping him through his army, so that they could go out into the universe, and
that makes sense. Basically, he took because it's an interesting idea, like kind of that they don't quite seize on. But yeah, the idea of taking a sort of marginalized group and weaponizing them as your cult, or taking some disaffected people and doing that. There's some potent ideas in there that maybe just don't get to rise to the surface in it.
Oh man, I wish that we had that to talk about for the book. That would have been a great little piece of throw in there. I didn't even think about it till just now. That's awesome. Wow, that's really cool. And the other thing I like about it is Spock 2 stays. Spock 2 is he's a clone now, and he stays to have a positive impact, which I like.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? So it gives you that balance of humanity. So, all right, you're going to learn that there's a different way. And maybe even Caniculus grows from it, because as a clone, I don't know, he's cloned. Did you guys also know one of the plants Koenig named after himself?
Oh, yeah, Retlaw.
Yeah, which I thought was cool.
Oh,
at least they gave.
Is it a little name inversion?
Yeah.
Walter?
Yeah, Retlaw, Walter. So
that's fun.
But Walter Koenig, I haven't read any of the other stuff he's written, but I think he is like a guy who likes like these just like weird ass ideas. Because I remember I talked to him at a con here in Austin, Texas, several years ago, and I saw him like walking around. He's checking stuff out, and I asked him, I was like, "Oh, did you see anything cool?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was over at like Artist Alley talking to like the comic book guys, talking about the comic book artists, because I want to find an artist to draw my comic, and it's gonna have like these space vampire babies and all like this." He just like just went insane telling me all of like this wacky stuff. I was like, "Oh my god, what the hell? I never knew this side of Chekhov before." But
yeah, I mean, he had ideas, which was awesome. And he did get to write some TV episodes, which is cool as well. It's a shame, because a lot of these guys got pigeonholed because of Star Trek, and they still were able to carve out some kind of career, which is nice.
Yeah. Well, he did have Babylon 5 too.
Exactly.
Yeah, Bester was one of my favorites.
But speaking of like the insane, crazy ideas, this is one of the, like my favorite episodes of not just the animated series, but of all Star Trek. With episode 8, The Magics of Magus 2, written by Larry Brody. While investigating the theory of creation, the Enterprise is caught inside an energy matter tornado. After emerging from the storm, the crew encounters a world where magic works and science doesn't. AKA the one where they meet the devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, because if you look at a lot of the recaps online, and a lot of people that talk about the episode, it's a focus on that it's the devil, but it's not the devil. If you think about it, because his character has the mischief and appearance of what we think the devil is, but if you watch the episode, he's just one of these. Because of his mischief and the way he behaved and his appearance, 16th, 17th century humanity labeled him a devil. But if you watch him, he's another one of those lonely characters. He's another one of those classic Star Trek characters that is just looking and not malicious. If anything, he's more like Trelane and Q. So I just and they had some pushback in the Bible Belt for this episode. Originally, Larry Brody, he was pitching the episode, and he knew that one of the big things that Roddenberry loved was he wanted to get God on the screen. That's how the episode got approved, because Roddenberry's like, do it. And then the network said, oh, no, you can do the devil, but you can't do God. So which is hilarious. You know what I mean?
Gotta save that for Star Trek 5.
Yeah.
The devil does tend to be the more visually interesting of the pair, as far as firing imaginations, I guess.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Oh, there's a scene where you see his fellow inhabitants of Magus 2, and it's I thought it was one of the coolest visuals in it, where there's like this rippling wave of like demonic faces. It looks pretty creepy, actually.
Yeah, when they're like all like those ghouls are like on the bridge of the Enterprise. But this is like I'm a bit of a metalhead. I'm into music outside of Star Trek, and this is like the most metal episode of Star Trek. You have those druid-looking guys in the flashback of the Megans when they were on Earth. You have the devil handing an apple to Kirk and McCoy. Just like the imagery of some of the stuff. Spock drawing a pentagram on the floor. Like,
right, these are all metal album covers.
like I know Larry Brody had to have been listening to Sabbath in the early 70s and probably reading Jim Starlin comics with like blacklight posters on the walls. I can picture this early 70s mentality that must have gone into this episode.
That would have been a great question to ask him during the interview. I mean, yeah, a pentagram. Spock draws a pentagram. How many kids got converted to becoming witches because of this episode? You know what I mean?
You're gonna go read some Aleister Crowley now.
And this could not have happened, a decade later in the 80s.
Today.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
the satanic panic was in full swing.
yeah, like you have like the religious right movement that like kind of like rose up with Reagan. Like, there's no way in hell people would have been up in arms about this if this came out in the 80s.
Imagine if they did Strange New Worlds episode and they Spock draws a pentagram on the Enterprise.
That'd be sick.
Oh man.
You know what? I liked about this episode? This kind of reminded me of, I loved X-Files, but I was always kind of frustrated that Scully would be exposed to crazy shit and not necessarily open her mind to the new world she was in. But Spock does that instantly in this, and he's like, magic works here, and not only that, I'm going to practice some magic right now. And he does.
It's interesting because, I mean, how was it 150? Enterprise took place 150 years before the original series. And think about T'Pol's character, who refused for so long to accept time travel. Even when the first time she experienced it, refused to accept it. And then you got Spock, who, it's like, logically, if science doesn't apply here, then we should be able to do magic. Yeah, no, I love that. It's a great thing, and it's
a cool scene.
It's a really cool scene. I love the stockade. I love taking them back.
Oh
to
yeah,
Salem.
there's like a trial.
It's a Salem witch trials because that's what happened to them. They, the episode's basically saying that these were the Salem witches, which I thought was interesting. Yeah.
And it has that very like Star Trek message of when Kirk is telling them like, yeah, we were really terrible back then in the 1600s when we were persecuting people, but we've changed, we've evolved, we've learned to get better. And it does have like Kirk doing like a magic battle with Modius or whatever his name was.
He has to save Lucifer, which is he's saving the devil. He's saving the devil's existence, and it turns out it's all a test anyway. But the fact that he's putting his life on the line for this entity, this intelligent entity, again shows you like, yeah, it's Star Trek. This is what the future can. This is what humanity can be in the future.
About as open-minded as I think you can get in the early 70s is that sort of an examination of what is essentially mankind's oldest foe, at least according to folklore, and like, well, let's see if maybe there's another side to this story, and that's a very Star Trek, very human or humanist view.
And I love that he doesn't, win. He doesn't like win the day by out magicking Modius in like their magic battle. He wins because he proves to him, he passes the test. He shows like, yes, I am willing to die. I'm willing to sacrifice my life for Lucian, for like this creature. And Asmodeus is like, oh, well, you passed the test. Humans apparently aren't as big of assholes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and he doesn't win by force.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with you. I really enjoyed this episode, and I found, and again, writing the book, I'm watching it with a different lens, and I'm seeing him in a different way. And I really appreciated that I had the opportunity to do that. When I watch the original series or watch Voyager, there's always episodes that something will connect with you, especially as you watch it in different parts of your life, because it has a different impact on you. Like Father, when you watch Yesteryear again after having to put your pet down. It's every year when I would read Mice and Men in class, as an example, I always had a different viewpoint because it was a different part of my life when I was watching it. And I love the fact that these episodes are Star Trek. I mean, and it's like I'll sit here and argue to the day, like, and one of my friends, and she loves Star Trek, and and she doesn't like rip the animated series, but she mocks it a little bit, saying, oh, it's the production values, and it's hard to watch, and I get it. It can be hard to watch if you try to sit down for 3 hours and watch every episode. It's definitely hard to watch. But if you take it for what it is, oh my God, this is Star Trek. These are Star Trek stories. It's awesome. Imagine if these guys were writing more of the Next Generation stuff, and they weren't firing them every day, evidently.
Well, we have 3 episodes remaining that we're going to talk about. The next one, episode 9, Once Upon a Planet, written by Chuck Menville and Lynn Jansen. The Enterprise returns to the shore leave planet in the Omicron Delta region, where the crew once took shore leave. As with their previous visit, things go wrong when the illusions turn deadly. So another sequel.
Another sequel.
Yeah.
Which, original series, how many sequels did we have? I'm Mud, right? That was it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was it, right?
Unless you count Klingon stories as like sequels, but...
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, they're progressing the Klingon, the animosity, but yeah, no, it's awesome, I think, and again, it gives you, as a Star Trek viewer, that connection again to the show. So it allows you to look past the clunky animation of the time and look past the fact that it's a Saturday morning cartoon. Yeah, no, I thought it was really cool. Really interesting to see how it outgrew its programming. The planet, the computer.
Right, the original caretaker of the planet has died. They'll learn eventually, and the AI, which has I guess been growing over time, over the decades or centuries. I'm not sure how long this guy lived, but is ready for a workers' revolution. He's I noticed there was a line in there where he says, "My life at this point has been one of service. It's time for a change." So yeah, he's.
It's the first Terminators.
Yeah.
Or the boy. Yeah.
I like the idea that I was confused about, it thought that, the ships that come to visit are the masters, and then these little organic things that beam down, they must just be, servants to their sky ship master.
That's a weird inversion or, a proto-concept of how the Transformers in 1984 worked, where the Ark that crashes on Earth looks for the dominant life form, and it sees all these cars and trucks and stuff, and it makes the robots transform into them because it assumes that's the dominant life form. But here's the idea about a full decade earlier, basically.
How about how they settle the episode too? I mean, how Kirk convinces you want to grow. We can teach you how to grow. You don't. It doesn't have to be a threatening situation. We're not trying to enslave you. You've developed. You've grown past your original programming. It reminds me of the idea Joss Whedon introduced when he did his Astonishing X-Men run with the Danger Room. Mm-hmm. That it became.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So and they didn't say you still have to be our Danger Room. You know what I mean?
Right. You don't try and put the genie back in the bottle.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love that, and and again, Kirk talks to them. Kirk has this. He will use his fists, and it's TV at the time. You have to have some action adventure, but more often than not, he talked. They found a solution by sitting down and taking your time and understanding each other's point of view and explaining things. Imagine if we did that today.
Right. I did love the kind of chillingness early on when Uhura's been taken by the AI, and there's some exposition that kind of comes through its conversation with her, and he says he's going to turn the people off, make them cease to function. It's just a chilling robotic version of murder.
It was a good idea to revisit this planet in animation because, it can create whatever type of fantasy you're thinking of. And, they could do things like a giant cat or pterodactyls that you couldn't do.
And they had a 2-headed dragon. Yep.
The visuals don't go so crazy that they feel incompatible with Star Trek either. They're balanced.
Right.
And stays compatible with the Shirley planet too in a way. You know what I mean? Like, okay, you still have, because if anything, you have the giant rabbit. You know, the Alice
Yeah.
in Wonderland, the giant rabbit. You know, in the beginning of both episodes, and I think that's great. You know, it shows you that okay, this is where we can go with it.
Yeah, McCoy almost gets killed by the Red Queen's
Yeah.
the
Oh,
guards
yeah.
in this one. That was kind of a fun
First
way to
guards.
just continue the motif from the original.
Why would he go back to that planet ever again?
You know, I was thinking Star Trek kind of. I know it's part of it is just you need drama, but there is a kind of a recurring motif in Star Trek that if you are having too much pleasure, man, something is going to crash in on you. Wesley is going to walk into a garden and get sentenced to death. The holodeck is going to try and murder you, or the Shoreleaf planet. I don't think it's an actual theme. Just kind of funny.
Yeah, you use pleasure to cause them pain, but in a way, it's like watch how they get out of that. I just think that's awesome.
Yeah, ultimately, these stories are generally about finding a way to do the responsible next thing that needs to be done after the genie is out.
Yeah, except for the malevolent life form and beneath the farthest planet, beyond the farthest planet. You're on your own, buddy.
He's going to jail.
You can't win them all.
You're gonna have another millennia. Wait till the next saps come by. Oh, let's explore this planet.
Is this the first episode where we see Lieutenant Gabler, their new recurring character for the animated series?
Yeah, he was in a couple episodes, right? I think it was.
'Cause this has a lot of the engineering stuff going on when the computer takes over the ship, and then we see Scotty actually having to do some zero gravity engineering, which is cool stuff that would be hard to do in live action.
I don't.
Oh, yeah.
It's not mentioned in this section, so he must have appeared before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we would have mentioned that his first appearance, and then he would have appeared in the data bank. That was like our little encyclopedia part of the book, which I thought was cool. It introduced things that maybe you wouldn't have seen in the Kudos encyclopedia. But yeah, he appeared a couple times. I like Gabler, and it gave you another African American strong character, which I think was important to continue once again to show the diversity of Star Trek and how it was growing. Yeah. Now,
Is this the first episode to seize on the fact that Amanda Grayson read Lewis Carroll to Spock as a kid?
And Discovery,
big thing.
brought that up.
Yeah, no, 100%. We actually mentioned it. It was hard because we try to do as much canon connections as possible, but the mandate for the book was it's an animated series book, keep it within the animated series, but where we could, in some of the other chapters a little thinner, it just made sense to, there's a lot of Discovery fans that are just fans discovering Star Trek because of Discovery, so to have that little connection, I think, is a cool thing.
Yeah. Well, shall we move on to Mud's Passion?
Yes, another sequel. I guess this rounds out the Mud trilogy. I think all 3 episodes written by Stephen Candle.
Yeah.
Or Candell. The synopsis here: Harry Mudd is back, this time swindling miners with a love potion, which I think was kind of a nice way of saying it's basically a date rape drug. But
I'd say how did this episode get on the air for kids TV? I mean, yeah, how did this?
Well, love potions was a thing.
Make this episode today. This episode would be pulled off the air. It was air once, and Stephen Candle would come out, or Majel Barrett. I do not want to see this episode ever again.
It would be hashtag cancel Harry Mudd.
Oh my God.
But yeah, that was a recurring trope. Like a lot of TV shows would have like a love potion.
Well, it stayed true to his character. He was always a schemer, and everything he had was it tied love into what he was trying to do. I love when they show up on the planet, friend Kirk, friends. I just think it's like it's Harry. And Roger Carmel comes back. He's the last of the 3 actors from the original series, guest stars to voice the role. And again, I don't think this episode works without his voice. And I think that was really cool. But the amount that they regressed the female characters, all that work that they had done through all these, even in the animated episodes, the way that they treated Christine. Oh, okay, I'll give you my phaser. Oh, okay, I want this love potion so Spock falls in love with me. You know what I mean? It's just like this is the only one that gets it's a little painful.
Yeah, it's the story of the times. Is that sometimes one step forward, two steps back. I did. There was a minor bit of fun thing that cracked me up. That Lieutenant Eric's, when Spock starts talking about his love for Chapel, Eric's is like, or something like he's like, woo-wee.
Yeah, that's fine. There's
just kind of funny.
There's two lines in the episode. Every episode I try to find something for the kids, and this time it was definitely not for the kids. And there were two lines in it that I was just shocked made it on the air. Scotty says, "I've got a hangover to shame all previous hangovers," and then, which is bad enough for a 5-year-old kid. Mommy, what's a hangover? Mommy, what's euthanasia? Oh, euthanasia is when we do. What's a hangover? Well, that's when Daddy had a bad night at work or something. You know what I mean? And then the other line was, this is tough because of all the examples of love saving the day. Spock goes, "A few moments of love paid for with several hours of hatred." And I'm just like, ow, man, ow. Rough.
Yeah.
It's a tough episode, man. Hey, we're going to trust Harry with the phaser because we're not going to let Christine have it to help us fight the rock creatures that are battling, right?
Right. Oh, that reminds me of, like, there's early on, am I correct that the Enterprise is basically showing up to, like, with an arrest warrant for Harry Mudd?
Yeah.
It seems a little beneath them as a starship to be doing that.
Oh, Kirk.
Although
Kirk
I always
probably
like
wanted
seeing Mudd.
Kirk probably wanted that assignment. He's like, I'm gonna go put a stop to this guy. He's caused enough problems.
Yeah, I can see that.
It'd be like Picard, and they say, "Hey, Q lost his powers, Picard. Why don't you go pick him up?" And he's like, "I'm all over that."
It's on. Well, Mudd is the ultimate example of the kind of lovable scoundrel. Sometimes a little less lovable, but he's a guy you kind of like to see tripping over himself. He's Star Trek's favorite kind of skeevy but likably skeevy bad guy.
Yeah, so we do have this final episode to discuss, the Territon incident, written by Paul Schneider. When a strange flash of light paralyzes the entire crew of the Enterprise, they begin to shrink. Kirk beams down to the nearest planet, Cepheus, and discovers a miniature race of descendants of a lost Earth colony, desperate to leave their volcanic homeworld.
This one was a little harsh too, man. Kirk's ready to let them all die. This is also the episode the animators appeared. We couldn't draw Walter's character in background, but this is the episode that they drew 4 more, new bodies. So I thought that was interesting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Have either of y'all ever seen the movie The Incredible Shrinking Man, or read Richard Matheson's book that it was based on?
I think I saw it on Sci-Fi Channel like 25 years ago.
Because it's like I haven't watched it for like 25 years, but I remember I watched it and it was much more serious than I expected. It kind of took a scientist and an approach to it, and it was kind of dramatic. It was deeper than I expected, and I thought the premise of this episode was a little silly, but the execution had some moments of like kind of thoughtfulness and a realization that this would actually be pretty kind of horrific to undergo.
I agree with you. It's funny. The only episode I feel like missed the boat on any of that was the Harry Mudd episode, because of just the way it was delivered. But no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, it has that silly idea, but at the end, it really, there's more to it than that.
Well, at some point they calculate there's a certain point, like when they reach such and such centimeters tall, that they simply won't be able to.
Yeah, their DNA will be
the controls.
Their DNA will be too compacted and they'll die eventually.
Right.
And again, you have like a dramatic ticking clock.
Yeah, there's your
to give some urgency.
There's your MacGuffin, right? No, exactly.
It's also an idea that later Star Trek would kind of rip off, where Deep Space Nine did a shrinking people episode.
I heard about that. Is that episode any good? I haven't seen it.
No, I love it, but I just love The only thing I love more in Star Trek than the original series is Deep Space Nine. So I'm typically going to side with Deep Space Nine.
You know, there was something in this episode. Well, I was reminded of, speaking of, we've talked about comics, the name of these people, the Terratins, which they find out was a derivation of what, Terra 10? Was that the
Yes.
colony?
Yeah.
Which reminded me, if people know, like, sort of Jack Kirby's DC work, was it Commandy? His future survivor kid who came from like a bunker named Command D. I don't know if there was some central movie or TV show that threw out this idea, but it does seem to have recurred into pop culture a little bit.
Yeah, even Star Trek Beyond sort of touches on that. Maybe not in the names, but just the idea of these people evolving. And hey, this was a captain of the Franklin. You know what I mean? Like, didn't see that coming.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of it's a fun reveal. I thought it was interesting that they don't dive into this much, but the Terratins seem to have, like, they have a strong pride, and I don't know if this was just supposed to be, like, what do they call it, short man syndrome or whatever, but they're like, we won't beg you to help us, Kirk. We're gonna ask you, and that's it. And if we die, we die. And I was like, oh, they don't lean into this as a story element, but I thought it was a kind of potent moment. If nothing else, like, if you see what they are as, like, as a disability or something like that they have built up a pride where they've learned to live with who they are and not feel ashamed at all.
And they're not going to beg you for help. I mean, they're going to ask, and then that's it. And I mean, I think that's, like you said, the disability part where you hit on. Another lost moment in the book. Yeah, huge. I mean, it's huge because we've accepted who we are. I don't need you to accept who I am. I'm not lesser of a person to you. You know
I almost wish that they had in the show done some more with it. And that's, they had 25 minutes.
I mean, the fact that 50 years later we're actually discussing that idea, I think that's huge. I mean, it's a little seed, and it might not have meant anything except for dramatic purposes, but it's there, and it's Star Trek, and that's why, to me, that's why Star Trek has lasted as long as it has. This is why.
What stood out to me was that they took the time to explain why the uniforms are shrinking also, when they're like, like these uniforms are based on some organic algae, and it's going to shrink also. It's like, most of your cartoons on Saturday morning are going to do a shrinking episode and not explain that, because it's like, who cares? The kid's not going to question it. They'll just go with it. But, like, they had, like, a little bit more obligation to be like, no, this is, like, serious Star Trek. We have to, like, cross the T's and dot the I's.
They appreciated the fans. They showed you. I mean, every episode showed, even the Mud episode, which probably wasn't for kids, showed that they thought about the fans when they were writing this. They didn't kowtow. They didn't, change what they were doing because of the fans, but they knew what made it special for the fans. And they David Gerald says, we felt a responsibility for that. You're right, 100%. I mean, somebody would have gotten stuck on that minutia and could have taken them out of the episode. And now they've got their explanation. No, I love that. It's an awesome idea.
And Roddenberry apparently always wanted to do a shrinking people episode. And he always wanted to do, like, a volcano exploding. So he got to have both.
Yeah, once he realized he could explode a volcano, he was happier than a pig in what.
Is that like did he do the volcano science project as a kid and it just stuck with him?
He just had his bucket list. The only thing he never got to do was God. And
he must have been happy with
probably because he didn't get to do it.
I hope it's too bad he didn't get to see Star Trek Into Darkness then. Isn't that the one that opens with, or is that Star Trek Beyond with the volcano, Spock in the volcano?
Yeah, Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he would have liked that.
Yeah, they could have done a little for Gene at the end.
Anything else on the Terratin incident other than how Kirk always manages to find like little paper clips or hairpins or whatever? He always can find an instrument to work with, but to like get the doors to open. But anything else on Terratin incident?
I think
go ahead.
The big one was I think for me the big one was just the fact that he was he was so upset because of the way the Terratins went about what they were doing, that he threatened the lives of everybody on the crew, that he wouldn't say to them, "We're going to save your lives." It's almost like he wanted them to sweat. You know what I mean? Like, well, we're going to beam all my people up first. And they kept asking, and he never would answer the question. And I'm just like, that's harsh. It's like,
Yeah.
there's a malevolent life form from M83. You know what I mean?
Maybe a slight misread on Kirk's benevolence there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Rich, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us about Star Trek the Animated Series. I am not only an advocate of that show, but I also really enjoyed reading the official guide to the animated series that I recommend anyone who likes that show at all pick this up. It is a gorgeous looking book, and if you're doing a rewatch of the show, it's super fun. Like, just flip through here and read a couple pages about each episode as you're going along.
Yeah, and see all the kind of those cool matte paintings in isolation, so you can kind of get to have some fun with them.
It was one of the cool things when I was writing it was, I didn't want you to feel like you. Too often we get these books and we feel like we got to start from page 1 and read it through the end. And the nice thing about this book, and even if I didn't write it, was you could just jump in wherever. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so the animation was really cool. Let me go back to the pages that they talked about animation of the show. Ted Knight did the voice. Let's go back and find out about voice recording. So yeah, I thank you for the kind words about the book. It was a lot of fun to do. Aaron and I had a good time working on it. Labor of love. We weren't sure in the beginning. We talked a lot about, well, if they don't buy it, what do we do? Because we wanted to make the book. But this book with the animated series doesn't work without the visuals. So thank goodness CBS was like, yeah, we see the possibility. We'd never have been able to afford to license all those images, and it doesn't work without the images for the animated series. Mark Cushman does those books. It's all text, and they work for that because it's a different kind of presentation. But for the animated series, we got lucky with. And then Aaron's just an amazing, and Father, you can count to this since you guys are Facebook buddies. Amazing designer. Again, this book isn't as powerful, I think, as it is without his work in there, and the care, like I said, with the tribbles, the data bank. We went back and forth on a lot of those design elements, and a lot of them I was just blown away because it's like that's what he does for a living. I'm a writer, designer. It's great, and then we were able to collaborate and come together on things that neither one of us saw. Which is why I love this conversation, getting to talk to Star Trek fans about. We're bringing up things that I didn't even think about. When I was a teacher, I used to be the same way. Like, all right, you teach mice and men this way. And I'm like, no. What do you think? And the kids would always come up with something. Once a year, I'd get one class where somebody would come up and I'm like, whoa, that's awesome. That's what I love about it, I love about this.
Well, Rich, thank you again for joining us. And just the last thing I'm going to ask you before we sign off, are you excited for Star Trek's return to animation in a few weeks with Star Trek Lower Decks?
Not really. I mean, and but it's fun. I mean, I like the fact that they're doing the show because it's going to introduce it to a whole new age group of people, a whole new segment of kids, and even adult kids that don't watch Star Trek. They're going to see this and laugh, and I'm sure I'll catch an episode, and and I've seen a lot of people excited for it online. I guess as I've gotten older a little bit, cranky old man, and then just with Discovery, I just realized that my enthusiasm level for things just isn't as high, so I'm not as disappointed. I'm looking forward to checking it out. I hope it's awesome. I hope it goes on for a long time. I hope that people embrace it. I hope that they're like, oh, this is cool. There was another animated show. The biggest problem with that is, though, of course, is, they're light years narratively and visually different. But, if it introduces more Star Trek to anybody, whether it's the animated series, the original series, Next Generation, I'm all for it. But I can't honestly say that I'm excited for it. But that doesn't mean I'm not looking forward to watching it and seeing what it's like. Is that a good answer?
It is. Yeah. Me and Dave are split on it because I'm really excited. He's more concerned that
I'm wait and see on it. Yeah, I don't want to see like a humor that kind of trivializes Star Trek, but like you, Rich, I'm interested to see what they do with it, and I don't wanna like piss in the cornflakes for anybody else. I'm ready to give it its shot. You know, Trek is ever evolving.
You two are exactly like how Aaron and I. Aaron's super excited.
I know.
He was trying to we need stuff to put in lower decks in the book, and we were talking to John Van Sitters, and we only had so many pages, and I was like, we have to focus on this book. I mean, if there's something that we could do, sure, but it can't be, it's like that's not a section. And I get it, and I'm glad, and I'm glad you're excited, Father, and I'm glad Aaron's excited, and I understand Dave's point of view too, and I talk to a lot of people too that have the same reticence, and that's fine. I mean, it is what it is. It's there. I honestly believe this, and I hate to say this, and David Gerald really made me think about this. He said, and I put it in the book, and it was one of the best Star Trek interviews I'd ever done. It was just, and I got to talk to somebody who was there at the beginning, and he was so gracious with his time, and he said to me, you got to walk the walk. He told Gene, I'm so afraid to jaywalk because I'm representing Star Trek. And I appreciate the fact that CBS has spent the money to get it back on the air. I appreciate the fact that they've done what they needed to do. I understand that it also allows them to tap into a core group of people that are going to pay them for the streaming service. There's a lot of different balls in the air, and I appreciate all of it. At the end of the day, Star Trek's back on the air. Is it Star Trek? Is it being told like a Star Trek story should be told? And I can't answer that completely because of Discovery. Watching Picard, I felt like his character was the only one that stayed true to his character. That he was always, and that was disappointing in a way. I don't necessarily think they're trying to tell Star Trek stories now. I think they're just trying to tell entertainment stories, which that's fine. They own the IP. The writers and producers they hire, they have a different purpose to tell them of stories they wanted to tell. It is what it is. I hope I know some people that are fans glean Star Trek stuff out of it, and that's great. And I know there's a lot of people that I respect and admire and their opinions, and they saw out what I saw, and that's fine. Because again, you may love Lower Decks. Lower Decks might be the goofiest thing out there, and Dave and I might be like, I ruined Star Trek, we're cranky old man, get off my lawn. That's okay, because at the end of the day, we still love something that's Star Trek, and we're still keeping it alive. And if anything, even if it's not exactly Gene's message, and I know Gene gets a lot of pushback because it wasn't Gene's message, whatever. Even if it's not what we think the idea of Star Trek is, it still exists. And you can't tell me 25 years from now, someone else is going to watch Lower Decks and watch the next animated show or watch the next Picard version show and then go back and discover, whoa, this is so much more than just entertaining television. And that's what gets me excited about all this stuff. And that's what gets me excited that this all exists. And it gets me excited to talk to other fans. People like, that are probably in my age group, and then people that aren't my age group that are younger. And even people that are older that are a little cranky. And I guess you could say I'm cranky because of the way I just said things, but I like talking to them too because it's like I like to hear both sides. You got to remember, you got to hear everybody's side. But I'll never sit there and lecture you and tell you, well, you got to be open to other ideas. That's what Star Trek is, because you're devaluing where they're coming from. And just like the show, they had 45, 48 minutes to teach you, to get that lesson across. We don't. I'm not going to sit there and tell you why you're wrong. I'm going to celebrate what we like together, and hopefully, I don't say hopefully, but you'll glean from it what you can. I get there's a lot of messages out there, especially from the actors that have been doing the show for so long about what is Star Trek, and I appreciate that. And there's a lot of people out there who say you're politicizing it, or everybody watches it for a different reason. You know what I mean? Like, one of the greatest experiences I had, I went to before, when Creation was doing conventions, there was another group called Slanted Fedora. And they started introducing new elements. And I got to see Andrew Robinson and Alex Siddig do at dinner. We did dinner, and then after dinner they did a little 2-man show, Garrick and Bashir, and it was awesome. And I was sitting at a random table with people I didn't know when I started talking to them. You know, one guy was a former military. One guy, political views were completely different than mine. But it was interesting and they got something different out of Star Trek. Even if you get something different out of it, you're still being exposed to these ideas that I believe in, that I could see us going to. And that's what I love about it.
Nice. That seems like as Trek a note to wrap up on as we can get. That about the exchange of ideas.
Yes. That was very well said. Sounds like something that somebody who writes about Star Trek should say. So.
What a coincidence.
It's still surreal that somebody paid me to write a book about Star Trek. I'm waiting for them to figure out, what did we do? Give it back.
But that will do it for this installment of the Tex-Trek podcast. We shall return to discuss the second half of Star Trek the Animated Series, and we'll also be talking about the news from Comic-Con at home, the panels for Lower Decks and Discovery later this month. And then, of course, we'll be talking about Lower Decks whenever that show gets out. It might be me and Dave. It might be me and someone other than Dave if he decides he hates the show, doesn't want to watch it. But it will.
We shall see.
It. So we will.
You should definitely do it and watch the show, just because you'll have that different lens.
Yes.
Think about the conversations you'll have.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I like it when we disagree. I like it when like we get to argue about something. I was like, oh, that's more interesting to listen to.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to sign off now. My earbud keeps falling out.
Thank you so much for having me, boys.
Oh,
I really appreciate
you for
it's been great.
Giving us your insight. That was great. And everyone listening or watching, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.